chair such a distinguished panel. First of all, we will try our best to follow the excellent example of our ministers and director from the previous panel. I hope we will succeed in this. Previous discussions yesterday and today have already addressed a lot of important issues. These issues relate to the challenges which we as Europe, and I don't mean just the European Union member states, but also other European countries face today, and particularly the role of education and science in tackling these challenges in the future. I hope during this panel we will have a chance of hearing the positions of the countries the ambassadors represent. These are different countries. Some are, of course, member states, but with specific views on certain issues. Norway, I can say, 1.5 foot into the European Union, but the 0.5 is still outside. So what are the reasons for this? Of course, Japan has a completely different perspective towards Europe, so I believe we will hear different points of view on the issues which concern us all. Let me just thank once again the ambassadors, but also their governments for the support for this project today, and I hope also in the future. During our discussion, we will be showing the draft, the working draft of the conclusions of this conference, and they mainly resemble what we have been discussing yesterday and today. And of course, these conclusions should be a framework for our panel, but also should serve as a guideline for our future actions. So this conference, as you already understood, is just the initial step towards a much bigger goal in the future. In the beginning, just allow me a few words about myself. Not to present myself, but I will explain why. I'm a maritime officer. I'm a Bachelor of Science in Maritime Affairs and International Trade. I'm a Master of European Studies. I have been involved in European integration in Croatia from the very first days of this process, from 2001. I have been dealing with preparation for negotiations, I have been dealing with negotiations for membership, I have been involved in the programming and management of EU funds, both at regional, national, international level. And today I coordinate the EU affairs in the strict sense of the word in the Republic of Croatia. I'm saying this because my education and my professional experience made me a firm believer in multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach. I don't believe that due to their complexity, the complexity of the European Union as an organization and the complexity of the challenges we face, nothing less than a very, very comprehensive interdisciplinary approach can be the proper tool. This doesn't mean that we should all be generalists and have shallow general knowledge about issues. By interdisciplinarity, I intend, and I believe that we all agree, is a very intense and interactive dialogue among disciplines. This is how I see interdisciplinarity. At the outset, and these are also the questions which I would like you all to address during the panel, maybe you could share with us your views on the current moment of the European Union. Of course, very important is the enlargement, or rather what we in Croatia said to be consolidation rather than enlargement of Europe. By this I mean principally the Southeast European countries. How do you see the role of science and education in addressing these challenges we face, and of course some specific points of view of your countries towards relations within the European Union and the countries with the European Union. So I want to make this very, very active. I kindly ask you to stay within 5 minutes for your initial expose, and then I would like to have a lively discussion afterwards, if possible. So let's start maybe from our guest from Japan. Excellency, please.
good morning. And thank you very much for your kind invitation to this conference. And I will try to finish my presentation in 5 minutes. and I put various information in this PowerPoint. So if you are interested in some data, I will later give you this PowerPoint. And please allow me to start with this very interesting gentleman, Mr. Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi. And he's a very interesting person. And he is one of person who designed integration of Europe. And his father was a diplomat of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his father was served as ambassador in Japan. And he met a Japanese girl, and they married, and so he is half Austrian, half Japanese. So he has a Japanese name named Aoyama Eiichiro. and he designed the flag of Europe, and this is the flag. And I like this flag very much. So blue sky or blue ocean, and golden sun, and red cross. And it reminds me of the Japanese flag to some extent. and he was a bit controversial person. And he did not get Nobel Peace Prize. At that time, it is said the Norwegian didn't like his idea somehow. but anyway, and he dreamed to integrate Europe. But he was very much aware of the situation outside Europe. And also he had a vision, what's the future of Asia? And he thought maybe Europe will become one bloc. And in Asia also there will be one bloc. And he imagined what kind of relations integrated Europe, should construct with Asian countries. So I want to just introduce his work and remind you of about him, and he gives me some inspiration to bridge between Europe and Japan. So that's why I draw your attention. And firstly, before I start my short presentation, please allow me to touch upon Japan-Croatian academic cooperation. And we have very good cooperation, and I'm extremely happy to note that Rijeka University is actively participating in such cooperation. And we have joint research projects, and one of them is landslide and flood issue. And Dr. Nevenka Ozjanic of Rijeka University is actively participating in this project. And as far as I know, at least 47 Croats, it's not a big number, studied in Japan. And two of them are Dr. Zlatan Tsar, your deputy rector, and Dr. Eliza Markova Tsar of Rijeka University. And so there are about 10 cooperation agreements between Croatian and Japanese universities. Now I want to touch upon Japan-EU relations. And in May this year, our Prime Minister Abe visited Brussels, and they issued joint press statement. And there are basic principles and ideas about Japan-EU cooperation. And we share common values of democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and shared principles, etc. And we are now negotiating to conclude a strategic partnership agreement, and also free trade agreement and economic partnership agreement. And there are concrete items for joint project, ITER project or broader project activities in the area of fusion energy. And also people-to-people exchanges are encouraged, and Erasmus Plus program is mentioned, Marie Sklodowska Curie actions are mentioned. And so the EU institutions is in Japan actively working. So all these are what we are doing now. There are 4 EU institutions in Japan, in Tokyo, Kansai, Waseda, Kyushu, and they are actively working. I'm very much quick because I wish to finish in 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. And so there are exchange and cooperation agreements by universities, and there are almost 4,000 agreements were concluded between universities. And UK, France, Germany, Italy are most numerous. And Japanese universities established their offices in European countries, UK, France, Germany, Netherlands, etc. And also students exchange program. In last year, from EU to Japan, 3,500 students studied in Japan. And from Japan to EU countries, 9,000 students studied in Europe. And now we invented new students exchange program, supported by both EU and Japanese government. And double degree project and mobility project are applicable to our relations. And there are many joint researches in many fields, space, ocean, so I just indicate the areas. And global climate change, we have a joint workshop in the past 6 times. And so these are common challenges for both of us. And also researchers visiting each other. 2 years ago, from Japan to EU, almost 8,000 researchers visited. And also from EU to Japan. And from Japan to EU, 46,000 researchers visited EU. And these organizations of Japan support these activities. And we have some framework agreement, Japan-EU Science and Technology Agreement. And this agreement stipulates the framework of the cooperation, and also we established a joint committee to review achievements. And we had 2 meetings under this agreement. And we established EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation in Tokyo. And this is a counterpart organization for some Japanese, some EU-funded programs, such as Horizon 2020. And we have some new programs, Vulcanus program, and 3 Croats, 3 Croatian students visited Japan last year, and from Zagreb and Varaždin. So both EU and Japan support these new programs. And now I move to the enterprise cooperation. Again, I just indicate the area. Japanese companies and European companies cooperate in many fields, and it will positively influence the researchers exchange. So nuclear power industry and express railway in UK. And not only Japanese companies, but all European companies will join this project. So in few years, you will ride on this Japanese technology train in the UK. And now we plan to sell superconducting magnetic radiation railway to the United States. And the American ambassador and our Prime Minister Abe tested, and they said, 500 kilometers per hour. So next, our plan first to sell to the US, and then next is to this region. So this is our dream. And robotics, yes, Japan-EU workshop on research and innovation in robotics was held. And now we are moving from industrial sector application to service sector, entertainment sector. And industrial cooperation in automobile sectors are also developing, and French and German companies are cooperating with Japanese companies. And again, future possible cooperation, hydrogen automobile. And BMW somehow gave up this idea to apply this technology to public use, but Japanese companies are trying to sell this technology, automobile, to the public from next year. And now Japanese companies re-entered to airplane production business. And we have already good cooperation with Boeing, but in the future maybe we can cooperate with European companies. And tissue engineering is very much fashionable in Japan these days, and Japanese government put a lot of money in this research. So conclusion, last slide. And we should jointly try to solve face common and global challenges. And we have somehow different angles, so it will supplement each other. And we have good knowledge and freedom of scholarly work in Asia. And also geopolitical strategic importance is, I think, increasing. And I didn't touch upon some cooperation in this area, but recently we had first Japan-NATO counter-piracy joint drill in Gulf of Aden. So this area is more and more important. So thank you very much.
For giving such a narrow time span. I would like to remind all of us that one of the world's greatest robotics experts, and this is something you mentioned, I believe his name is Hiroshi Ishiguro, if I'm not wrong, visited this very place very recently and participating in a conference which we here organized. So actually, Rijeka contributes to this Japan-European Union relations already, but hopefully much more in the future. Now I would like to invite Madame Michelle Bocuse. Before that, I would just like to ask European excellencies maybe also to give a reflection on the importance of education and science within the scope of enlargement process. How important it is in your view that education and science are incorporated in the enlargement process of the European Union, if you can, please. You can have an additional minute for it.
Thank you very much. And in fact, you are asking us a very broad question, which is a challenge per se, I mean, in trying to cover all the different aspects. And actually, I would like to start from where Minister Kusic stopped when she talked about the European values and the European crisis and where we are and what is important at this particular stage. Yes, she was right in reminding us that we built Europe on a project, an objective, and values which were, of course, peace, stability, democracy, human rights, rule of law, and those values, which I think are extremely important nowadays when we're talking about our identity as European, but also about enlargement process, because this is also the basis on which we are building things. But we're talking also about a crisis, an economic crisis within Europe, which has also led perhaps to a crisis of those values, a crisis of what do we think about our future, how do we re-enter, how do we redream Europe in a sense, how do we project ourselves to the future, and how do we make Europe more attractive also to, and in particular in the case of enlargement, to the countries that we are dealing with, we are talking about. So how do we do that? What do we build on? How do we also mobilize our own citizens into this project? Well, of course, you know what I'm going to talk about, of course, research, education, I mean, all those developments. What are the great successes of Europe? I think the successes of Europe up to now have been in the areas where we have involved our citizens, where our citizens have been participants, they've been actors, they've been players in the field, and this has been in the programs where we have tried to have a sort of bottom-up approach. And for me, one of the greatest successes of Europe has been the Erasmus programs. This has been really one of the areas in which we have built the European project, we have built European citizenship by bringing people together. And this is one of the areas that we have to go on developing, valuing, and we have to share more broadly. This is something we work on, of course, on a bilateral basis between many of our European partner countries, like we work with Croatia a lot. What we're trying also is, Mr. Minister, you talked about your objectives in developing further the mobility of students. This is an area where we are working very much. We were here with a number of French universities and schools last week on the scholarship fair both in Zagreb and in Rijeka, talking about how to develop those contacts, how to increase mobility. This is one of our objectives. We have already a number of agreements between Croatian and French universities and schools. We have also a National School for Administration, which is broadly training into how to work together within the European framework, how to build our future together. So that's an area on which we concentrate a lot. There's another area which was mentioned by Mr. Rector, which is also the European research area, innovation, how to be smarter, how to be working better and more smarter together. And this is something that we have to focus very much upon. Higher education, innovation, knowledge, these are the values of Europe, and these are the comparative advantages of Europe that we can share and we should share better, we should focus on. If we want to start a new vision in Europe, if we want to start with a new project in Europe, and there's a new commission coming, which we hope is going to give us this very broad political vision of where we want to go, we have to build on our comparative advantages. And this is mostly, I would say, innovation, knowledge, how to share knowledge, how to use this knowledge, how to build on those networks that Rexa told us so brilliantly about, and how to develop that. So that's the other objective, how to build the European research area better together, and how to use it as a tool for attractivity for Europe, and use it as a tool also to development in the region. We can build it by making, as you said, science more attractive. And today, what is new in science? I had a chance some time ago to ask that question to a Nobel Prize awardee. And I said, somebody who'd been working for many, many years in science, and he said, I asked him, what is new in science? And he said, well, there's nothing really new in science, apart that there is much more of it. And also that science now is made in the margins, in the borders between the different disciplines. And this is where innovation happens. It's not so much very often in the core of disciplines as in the interaction between the different disciplines, under control, of course, of specialists in the question. And I think this is an area where we can work more and better together. And this initiative, this particular initiative, can be a real asset into development of those new ideas. Of course, we have those tools, we have the framework program, we're going to have Horizon 2020, we can raise European competitivity, we can raise European attractivity, we can increase mobility through that. And the question now is how to reach out to our neighborhood, because you said the European Union is not the same thing as Europe. And Mrs. Pusich's story is very brilliant about the complex relationship we have with the neighborhood. So far as Southeast Europe is concerned, I think the key and the tool, one of the key tools, is to bring citizens together, to involve the citizens into the project, and how best to involve them into the European project than through science education and through exchanges, through mobility of people and of students. If I look back into history, if I look back into how the European Union was created, which was after the Second World War, very soon after the Second World War, we decided that we wanted to rebuild the euro together. And this was done by France and Germany, who've been really foes during this World War. And we decided that we wanted to put our economy together by creating first the community of steel and coal. But we also wanted to put our heads together and put our young people together. And I think one of these, the greatest achievements has been through the decision in the Élysée Treaty in 1963 to strengthen our relationship through young people and to create the German-French Office for Young People, to bring people together, not just only to talk and meet, but to build projects, to really build projects together. And I think that this is the outreach that this center can have towards the region into helping building those really strong ties at the level of citizens, bottom up, because you don't decree those corporations. I know when I'm addressing scientists, you don't decree that a scientist is going to collaborate with another. You prepare the conditions, you help them meet, and then it starts from bottom and then it goes. And that's the sort of conditions I think that we must all work to create together, and I think in which the center will have a great responsibility. And we are, of course, more than willing to participate, contribute, and be a player with Croatia.
Thank you. I believe, Excellency, because you have pointed to an extremely important dimension of European processes as such, and even more so importantly within the enlargement context. This is this grassroots cooperation and integration. And you also mentioned something very important, which I agree fully to. The economic crisis has been a catalyst in a negative sense of also the political crisis and the identity crisis of Europe, but therefore growth and jobs can also be part of rebuilding the confidence of citizens. So what we will try to do here in Rijeka, I hope, is build something kind of a pragmatic, usable science rather than have a lot debate club. So this is our aim. Excellency Slin, can you please be so kind to present your case?
Thank you for the lawyer. In your introduction, you talked about one member of the panel having specific views on certain parts of the European Union. I think we probably know who you were referring to. So I'd like to take up your invitation to look at a few of the challenges that the European Union faces, certainly from our perspective. It is obviously true that the challenges are many and they are complex. They are in the economic field, they're in the security field, the foreign affairs field, they are in the enlargement field. And already that is a good pointer to the interdisciplinary nature of the challenges, which will require an interdisciplinary kind of solution. The world is changing, we know that. The world is changing very fast. I'm not sure that Europe has the luxury of a long, rambling debate between itself on how Europe tries to position itself in the new globalized world. The EU has been a massive success, a success probably beyond the dreams of its founding fathers that Michel referred to. But the world now looks very different. It looks very different to how it did 20 years ago when the Berlin Wall came down. It looks even more different to how it did 50, 60 years ago when the EU was taking shape. And the EU has to react accordingly. Otherwise, we get left behind. And that's where the risk of us becoming the gazelle that we saw on the slide earlier on, that is a risk that the EU gets left behind by other newer players in the globalized world. There were lots of figures, lots of facts and figures about how our competitors are doing. Listening to the radio this morning, China is disappointed that its economy has only grown by 7.3% in the last quarter. Oh, for those figures, please. But the fact that India, China, other growing powers on those sort of trajectories have quite kind of serious potential implications for our own economic standing in the world. And there's a real risk, there's a threat to the well-being, the standard of living of all European citizens if we can't react. Inevitably, that brings us round to the question that kind of certainly London finds itself asking all the time: how does the European Union reform itself? This is a theme which has earned the UK a pretty bad reputation around some of the corridors of Europe. We're accused of being anti-EU, we're accused of being anti-European. We're very well aware that in the corridors of the nascent Juncker Commission, it is already being referred to as the British question. Well, the first point is we make no apologies for that. As the slide suggested this morning, we have to keep running. We have to be running. We shouldn't be afraid of these discussions. And the second point is that we believe that the debate that we're advocating is for the benefit not just of the UK, but for the whole of the European Union and wider Europe and future members of the European Union. Two main issues, perhaps. The list on the agenda is very, very long, and to fit it into the 5 3/4 minutes that Hervoya has allocated us is just not going to be possible. But if I was to highlight two issues, there would be one on substance, there would be one on form, on process. The substance issue is perhaps inevitably competitiveness. I could list a whole list of sub-issues that where the EU probably needs to do more to make itself competitive, to keep up with the Chinese economy, which is only growing at 7.3% at the moment. But for the purpose of this discussion, I prefer to focus just for a couple of minutes on the process issue, and that is the point about democratic accountability, because I think there's a read across to the role of the centre, which is why we're here today, I think. Mrs. Pusic said this morning, she could have been reading my notes, we need to know more. That is inevitably true. We need to know more at decision-making level. The citizens of Europe need to know more from a voter point of view. We all have our anecdotal evidence, perhaps, of how the citizens of Europe perceive the European Union. Certainly my friends at home, even educated professionals, don't quite understand what the case for the European Union is. If I bring it closer to home and put it into Croatian context, the consistent message I get from going around Croatia, whether it be the wine growers of Istria, or as some of us saw a few weeks ago in Osijek, some war veterans turned entrepreneurs, they're not quite sure what the European Union does for them, whether it helps them or hinders them. And that is an issue. That is an ongoing issue that we can't afford to ignore. Another indicator, slightly more scientific this time, is the result of the European Parliament elections. We don't need to talk about the turnout in Croatia, but I think we do need to look at perhaps some of the reasons for that low turnout, not just in Croatia, but in the wider European Union as well. The perception is that turnout that low indicates a lack of trust in democratic institutions. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, that is arguably risky. There have been some people who have said in response to those elections, well, the answer is to centralise more in the hands of the European Parliament. That kind of strikes me as slightly ironic at a time when the trend in Europe, including in the UK these days, is to decentralise and to devolve power. Is the solution really to centralise power into a higher body such as the European Union? The solution is not straightforward, inevitably. It's complex, it's interdisciplinary, to use the buzzword. For our part, the UK would certainly like to discuss redressing the balance between Brussels and national parliaments. More Europe or less Europe, I think, was one of the themes you discussed yesterday. National where possible, Europe where necessary, is a phrase which has been coined by an EU Prime Minister and not the British one. It's one we buy into, but it's not one that we invented. So looking at that balance is one issue which will be on our agenda. At another level, as I think seems to have been discussed yesterday, is the scope, the need to promote discussion, to stimulate discussion. Oh, my notes have turned around. By centres such as this one. Debates about Europe, debates about the EU are not something we should be frightened about. They're something that we should try to promote. They're healthy. There's no monopoly on good ideas and good suggestions for the future. I do want to commend the establishment of such a centre in Rijeka. And that's not just because I'm sitting here in front of an audience drawn from Rijeka. Rijeka has a fabulous opportunity to make itself a strategic economic hub for Central Europe and Southeast Europe and the Balkans. That is potential that we would love to see realised both for Rijeka and for this part of Europe. If that is true, or factors that make that true in the business context also make it true in the academic context as well. Terrific reach into Central Europe, terrific reach into Balkans, into those countries that still aspire to be members of the EU. So you very much support the idea of what you're doing on an interdisciplinary basis. One last paragraph. Croatia sits in Southeast Europe. It only just joined the European Union. I was proud to have been there on the day that it did accede. It's a memory which I will cherish for a long, long time. The UK is in the extreme northwest of Europe, a longer-standing member. Our perceptions of Europe and the EU are inevitably very different to yours. But the challenge is very much the same. Our governments, people, institutions such as this one, work together to promote debate and to promote change for the benefit of all the people of the EU and wider Europe. What we need to do is to make sure that the EU and Europe is the lion, not the gazelle.
Thank you very much. David, diversity is what we in this region consider to be the richness and our main added value, and you pointed out diversity is what we need in debates about Europe. You mentioned a few very important things I would like just briefly to comment on. One is the rates of growth in China or India or other similar places, but my personal private comment on that is that I prefer the European slower rates of growth, but based on some other core European values, rather than very steep growth rates at the cost of other maybe criteria of a successful society. And another thing which you mentioned, and in my mind extremely important, is the low turnout on elections. But the low turnout is not only in European elections. Actually, people are going to cast the vote less and less to each and every election. This means, especially if I remember the example of Croatia's European election, you had a low turnout of 20%. At the same time, when you ask people whether they supported Croatia's membership and the EU project as such, it's still above 60%. So the belief is not decreased in regard to the European idea as such, but as you said, in institutions. So we have to think how to bring institutions and decision making much closer to the people. This is actually the point we try to make also here. Ambassador Hofstad, as I've said, Norway is very close to Europe, knows everything about Europe, but again has a specific perspective on this. I would also like maybe you to comment on how you communicate Europe in your country. You have been voting about membership in Europe, it has been rejected, but still you remain very close and connected. I was going to ask the questions about communicating Europe to Excellency Baricic, but he's not the best example of communication today, so I leave this question to you.
Thank you very much, Louis. You said that Norway has 1.5 foot into the EU system. It reminds me of a similar discussion I had 2 years here in Croatia. I was saying the same as you, and my Danish colleague said, it's not possible to be 75% pregnant. And that's, in a way, it is right, but I believe that pregnancy and cooperation are, the latter is more a consequence of the first. We are very close to the EU. We are more integrated than Croatia, I believe. 70% of our exports go into the EU, 70% of our imports are from the EU, and I think basically, if you look at this politically, we could say that Norway and the Nobel Committee granted the Peace Prize to the EU in 2012 is actually a symbol on how we look at the EU. We have to divide between EU as a political project and the question on economic integration. When we talk about EU as a political project, today the situation is more difficult than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But on the other hand, EU has always been a process. It has been mentioned before, and I think it is important to underline it, that constellations are shifting. They are more shifting now than they did when we had the Cold War. And we can see that we are struggling to find the right position for EU in this context. But it is actually not more dramatic, in my view, than that we have to be more dynamic now than we were 30, 40, 50 years ago. As an economic project, the present situation is, of course, very much about the financial crisis and how the EU is struggling to make reforms in order to come over the crisis. When it comes to Croatia in that respect, I have said many times, and I still believe it, I don't believe that the economic problems in Croatia is very much due to the financial crisis in Europe. If you are not integrated enough to have the direct consequences of that. I think what you see here in Croatia is more the consequences of not having carried fully out the economic transition and the administrative reforms. But when it comes to the question you mentioned about enlargement, then I believe that Norway can have a bit different perspective of this because we are not a member. As a non-member, we are very much in favor of integration. And I say that even though we pay for the enlargement as well. It might be that we look more politically at the enlargement. And to have stability in this region means in the long run that also the countries in the region should be integrated. And that is actually our policy. We are working for that, if it is in Serbia or Kosovo or Montenegro or Macedonia. And we do that together with a lot of friends and allies in the area. I believe that actually when we look at Croatia's policy here, we are very much in line with you. But I see one thing which I think is rather important, and that is that if the rest of this region should be able to integrate in Europe, there is no point for these countries to wait. I believe that I very often hear the word fatigue here, and we need to analyze what kind of fatigue are we talking about? Because if the countries in this region would transform into sound economic countries, I don't believe it would be very hard to integrate them afterwards. You cannot wait and not doing anything in order to get the pressure from the EU to transform. You can do it, but then it will take time. But in a way, you can choose and you can start the reforms now, and it would, the negotiation period would not be as long as one suspects there would be. When it comes to just very shortly about education, I believe a center of European studies here is a very good idea. But in a way, you can choose having a center here for European students who want to learn more about this region. And there are a lot of topics here which I think is extremely interesting for European studies. It could be about transitional justice, about reforms, economical reforms, about human rights, reconciliation, peace and conflict, and so on and so on. That is the one perspective. The second is to open up studies for local students in order to learn more about Europe. But these are two different things. And the third would be more like the rector mentioned, I mean, about how to face the challenges ahead, smart specialization, things like that, more technical. I'm not sure if you are able to have all these different perspectives in one European study department. Maybe you have to choose, maybe you have to start somewhere. What I know from Norway is that there is a keen interest amongst students to learn more about this region. And I believe if you open up for studies comprising, all these things about this region, it would not only be interesting for European students, I think also it would be very good for you in the region to start analyzing in an academic way what has happened here, what is happening here, and how the future will be. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.